we can probably do is to control or rather combat the kind of flooding that is witnessed post the floods, because flooding happens because of our own actions. She spoke of, the minister spoke about the ingress into the riverine areas. So that means there are these human blockages, there are settlements there, which is why we see so much damage. And also then I will first ask Mr. Samuel Rizk to answer this question, and then I will come to the business, because there then the question of governance comes in.
Thanks very much, Afia. So I'm on a panel of scientists. I'll stay away from the science. But I'll stick to the topic of human rights, and I think that's important because it's not natural, hasn't been natural for a long time for people to think of climate change as a human rights issue or environmental justice. But I would say there are two things that make climate change now a particularly clear human rights issue. That's why people talk about climate justice, environmental justice. And I can explain this by sharing many dissertations, PhD dissertations, or policy notes, or research papers. But instead of doing that, maybe I point you to this picture over here to explain why climate change is actually a human right. On the early warning side, this picture was about 20 or 25 years old, or 50 years old. We would all be sitting here and say, flood happens every once in a while. It's kind of faked. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, sometimes it affects a lot of people, sometimes it doesn't. Now it happens every other year. Sometimes it's huge. It takes away a lot of capital, human capital, financial capital, etc. So not doing anything about climate change with a warning, and something's coming, that is a violation of people's rights to actually be protected. And I think that's important to know. So that's the early warning side. The recovery side. I believe these days, recovery delayed is recovery denied. To date, UNDP and many other agencies are still working on projects to recover from the 2022 flood, let alone the 2025 flood. This is where we are now. The 2.3 million houses that were lost in Sindh and Balochistan. I don't know what's a fair number to say in terms of complete houses that are now. Let's say 50%. What about everybody else? So the recovery that is slow, I think, is an injustice to almost everyone. I think the minister made it quite clear on the financial side. There is a grievance that is legitimate on the part of countries like Pakistan and many others who are saying, what is the business case of me taking loans to finance recovery? So when I pay back this loan, I pay the capital, I pay the interest. Is there anything else left that I can actually use? Secondly, for 3 or 4 years now, we've been talking about the loss of damage fund that COP19 in Sharm el-Sheikh, I think late 2022, Pakistan was critical as a voice to bring people together, to actually pull together the fund. How much money has the fund actually dispersed up to now, given all the catastrophes that have actually happened so far? Zero. Is Pakistan in line to receive any of that funding? I hope so. Amen. How about the global shield against disaster risk that's supposed to provide risk insurance to all of the countries that are kind of like Pakistan? Another ethical issue. If you have, 30, 40% poverty in a country, and everybody basically is living paycheck to paycheck, where do they get money for insurance? They'd rather spend on education, maybe health, maybe their kids, etc. And insurance is the last thing on their mind. So there is a fund that was supposed to support risk insurance, maybe it's for farmers, for livelihoods, etc. That's a really dispersed item so far. Pakistan has been discussing this with them for 2 or 3 years now. So the grievance narrative is clear. I think the issue that relates to climate change and environmental justice and human rights is clear on the early warning side, and is clear on the recovery side. After you've been saying, you've been asking, what are the differences between all of these floods? I think there are scientific differences, and I leave that to a scientist. Let me speak about the response from 2022 to 2025, because that answers your question. 2022, the Secretary General showed up here as a massive flood, $30 billion worth of loss and damage, etc., all of this. And I think that is important. there was this marshalling of global support for Pakistan. It was quite clear. It started from a flood response plan that was pretty well funded. I mean, 70 or 75%, that's well above 50% average of any humanitarian response plan. A post-disaster needs assessment led by the UN, the World Bank, ABB, and the European Union, quickly turned into a recovery framework. Everybody went to Geneva in January 2023. And then there were the pledges. A good bit of it actually came, although it was loans and repurposed loans, only $500 billion out of nearly 11 billion was actual grants. And then our follow-up mechanism, international partner support. And it kept going and going. 2025 flood, Laken 2025, the global situation financially, and in terms of global solidarity with countries in distress, etc., it changed completely. So in fact, I think everybody had seen that there was really not much money there to be had. Some entities had already committed. The World Bank had already committed $20 billion for 10 years, some of which were just for response, loans. IMF has a resilience standby facility, etc. And then here's the most curious part. Despite the fact that the government actually asked for support on a post-disaster needs assessment, did actually take place. Instead, the government, first of all, responded on its own. So almost everybody that was actually impacted received immediate support packages, whether you were in KQ, Judy, or Punjab particularly. And I think that is fine. And then we wondered why a little bit of a foot dragging on post-disaster needs assessment. Isn't this really important? And we heard from a number of officials that actually this time around the lesson learned is not to jump to the international community and try to do another donor conference and get home. The lesson learned is a governance lesson. Why does this keep happening? Once you ask why questions, recurring why questions, then it becomes a governance issue, then it becomes a serious issue. And that's where I leave it there to say, the future of flood response is about governance, is about accountability. It's about why people go back to the same places that flood over and over every couple of years and lose their homes and get displaced. It's about interconnectivity between the governance bodies of disaster management, National Disaster Management Authority to the provincial to the district. It's about the relationship of data. Everybody collects data, but if the data don't sit in one system or talk to each other, then the warning system hasn't actually happened. We went to the north with His Excellency, and we saw firsthand what good planning falls in the face of actual conditions. Data, towers, early warning systems don't talk to each other. In some places you need redundant communication systems. So it's not only a SIM card that's in an early warning station, it needs satellite support, etc. So I think the data and the governance and the learning lessons on the task, and then taking accountability and responsibility, and then lastly, speeding up the recovery and focusing on the resilience of three types. Resilience of people, that's their livelihoods and jobs. Resilience of communities, basic community infrastructure that helps everyone out, and they help each other out. And then the resilience of institutions. It cannot be the case that in the face of any crisis, the institutions that are entrusted with promoting resilience are the first to die. So focusing on resilience, I think, is really quite critical, and building it and rebuilding it and fortifying it in the face of an inevitable flood that will be more shocking than before, let alone everything else that can happen at the same time. A cycle of floods and droughts, God forbid an earthquake, maybe some displacement, maybe some other, security-related issue, all of these devastating attacks that are happening here. These are all multiple crises happening at the same time that tax the response mechanism of the country. How much more can this country take?